everyone. This is Kin 355, Ethics in Physical Activity and Health. Today's topic will be sport ethics. Sport ethics obviously is a large topic, actually like all the topics that are in this class. Because it's an introduction, we want to make sure that we hit all of these different aspects of ethics in healthcare. And so this is certainly, the short-term nature of this topic is not unlike the others, but certainly this is a very, very large topic with lots of different concepts within it. And so we'll introduce today a couple of different things. Obviously, you've been exposed, I suspect, to most of these topics. And so again, it's about thinking more critically about them, making more decisions, perhaps, about how you feel about some of these topics, and then being able to kind of formulate facts together to have an argument, which is what we essentially do in this class. So anyways, without further ado, sports are absolutely a prominent component of our society. In a kinesiology course, it almost goes without saying. Most of us, or some of us at least, have come into this field because we either played sports, enjoy sports, something got us in the field of movement science, which obviously is kinesiology. And even individuals who are not particularly fond of exercise science or have any interest in that love sport. And so it is absolutely a part of our society, a huge part of our society. And, we could go on and on about how it's present. Some examples would be media coverage. I mean, goodness, there's 8 different ESPNs. Every network has a sports network now, apps and websites and, so on and so forth. We have absolute media coverage. Even people who don't particularly follow too many sports probably still even know who the big names are in the larger sports because of media coverage. We have those sports stars, and some sports stars are some of the biggest celebrities in our world. So we absolutely elevate sports stars to kind of top status in our society in many instances. And then, of course, everything else that comes along with sport performance, entertainment, video games, fantasy football leagues. Like I said, you could have this list could go on with how sports are present in our society. We start sports very young in age, typically. A lot of us probably played soccer when we were 4 or 5. We probably played t-ball. And so our sport participation also begins quite early for most individuals, even if you don't stick with it. So even if you end up not liking certain sports, chances are you have tried something formally in your past. And so when you think about, why are they so popular? And, I would encourage you to kind of stop and brainstorm. Why do you think they are popular? Well, they're entertaining, so absolutely people find them fun to watch. It absolutely, for some people, is intriguing to see. The people that reach the top of the sports world are very, very talented at what they do, and so everything's kind of lined up for them. Nicely, if you will, like genetics and opportunity. So we have there's a lot of people that are just fascinated from the pure athletic performance standpoint. And actually, I can share with you that I think athletic performance is quite fascinating, even for sports that I don't particularly follow very much. When I do see different sports being played at the top levels, it is very impressive. So that part is also very, intriguing for people in our society. Social bonding. Um, Humans are very social creatures, and so we actually, we throw parties for Super Bowl and, for World Cup. We go to bars and we go to restaurants to watch games. Um, we have sports teams that we root for. And so if you have fellow fans, you tailgate, so on and so forth. So there's a whole component of bonding and social activity around sports as well. And finally, America loves winners. Winning in sports brings monetary and status rewards. We'll talk about athlete income in a little bit. Some of these individuals, like I said, they have reached kind of the top of our society in terms of popularity, in terms of how much they get paid, and in notoriety. So if someone, when you win the Super Bowl, like I said, even if you aren't particularly a football fan, you probably know who won the Super Bowl. When you look at all of these things, I hope you can see just how clearly, or how clear it is that sports are a prominent portion of our society. This is left blank on purpose. I'm actually going to stop here just for about a minute, and I'd like you to jot a few things down and think about sport. So not just physical activity participation, but both physical activity participation and sport participation, pros and cons. Okay, so we're going to take just about a minute, jot some things down, or at least think of a couple examples for each of them. Wrap up that last thought, if you will. And then I don't have anything, in front of me list-wise, but I will throw out some thoughts for each. And so you will have probably others or more. So let's go with pros first. For sport and physical activity participation. Health. We know physical activity is very good for health. It's probably the best thing you can do for your health, actually. And so from that standpoint, physical activity and sport participation is great for physical health. It's also very good for mental health, social health, perhaps spiritual health, so on and so forth, stress relief. Some of the pros we've talked about already, the social bonding, the entertainment, they're fun. Other pros include, participating as a child. There's a lot of belief that it helps with team building and sportsmanship, teaching children sportsmanship and how to be on a team, how to win, how to lose graciously. Skill development is a pro, so learning to throw a ball and learning to swing a bat. Skill development is really great for motor development and such. Character building would be another pro, where you again learn work ethic, perhaps, where you learn that you need to practice to succeed, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of pros. I think I said they're fun and they're entertaining and your social value already, and certainly all of that is true. Now think about some cons. What are some cons? Performance enhancing drug use. If you find that that's a con, you may not. You may be fine with it. We'll talk about that here in a second. Sportsmanship could also go under the cons, where perhaps people aren't exactly winning or losing graciously. There's some cons in terms of, illegal behaviors, sports betting, mafia being involved. Honestly, that actually has been documented. Um, you know, athletes perhaps um, reaching hero status. So they've reached the top of their game. Is that a con? I don't know. Just throwing it out there. Other cons would be maybe exercise dependence. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it has happened before. Or the female athlete triad, where women who are exercising, overtraining, and not eating very much are having some issues. And so on and on. There are both pros, there are both cons, or both pros and cons, and that's true probably for any topic. But just to think and kind of ground ourselves to create this foundation for some of the topics that I'll throw out there today for you. So again, just kind of grounding ourselves in the positives and then perhaps maybe some more negative aspects of sport participation. One of those pros, though, perhaps for you, would be character building. Character, we should probably define. So if someone has character or good character or positive character, that's usually what we mean when we say that someone has character. They have a great character. Character is the distinguishing moral or ethical qualities of an individual. So this is a positive thing if someone has character. And there's a lot of belief that individuals can develop positive attributes when they participate in sport. Perhaps like honesty, humility, benevolence, compassion, loyalty, respect, responsibility. And so I'll just throw out a couple examples and you can go through this list and kind of fill in the details. But think about sport and maybe your own participation in sport and how maybe you can develop these positive attributes through sport. For instance, humility, losing graciously. So you lose the game, but that's okay. You go over and you congratulate the winning team. Loyalty to your teammates, to your team, to your coach can absolutely be taught through sport. Respect of, again, your teammates, your coach, the officials, the fans. Responsibility, showing up to practice on time, trying your best, keeping a commitment, doing the right things outside of practice. So all of these things, I think you could argue that you can develop them through sport. And again, this is why a lot of people believe that children should be participating in sport from a young age so that you can use sport to teach these things. Just because someone participates in sport doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be building those positive attributes, because you can certainly go the other way. You certainly can be a very sore loser, not congratulate the winning team. You can speak ill of your teammates or your coaches or the refs. You can yell at refs, argue with refs, boo the other team. So there's lots of other negative aspects that come with sport. There's a lot of belief, and I believe this, there's a lot of belief that sport reflects societal norms. So how we treat our athletes, our fellow team members, our coaches, the refs, the fans, how we treat those people is typically also how society is operating. If that doesn't really make sense to you, just kind of think about it a little bit more, and then think about how a game, kind of some of the behaviors that are going on in a game, for whatever it is, or whatever example you're thinking of, and how that kind of looks like society. Sportsmanship, then, I've used this word a couple of times already. Sportsmanship, defined, would be a matter of being good, having character, and doing the right things in sport, okay, the right actions in sport. And you're going to read an article by Lumpkin from 2011, which I still really like. It's a couple years old now, but I really like it, that talks about building character through sport. And she argues that ethical behavior, sportsmanship, and character are inseparable. So all of these things go hand in hand. And I'll leave that there because I'd like you to read the article and reflect on it, take some time with your own thoughts. But that's kind of her main premise, is that these three things are hand in hand. Well, let's go kind of now the other way and talk about what we would call cheating. And I think it's pretty clear that winning is very important in our society. And from a very early age, individuals, athletes, in this lecture, but individuals really do learn the importance of winning and coming out on top. If you think about the question, well, why do people cheat? And whatever cheating you mean, this could be on an exam, this could be, in sport, or even, here's a good example, when I was 4 and 5 years old, playing Battleship with my brother, I couldn't let him win. I had to win, right? So I would cheat. I would flat out cheat so I could beat my brother at 5 years old in the game Battleship, which had no consequences. Plagiarism, cheating. Right? So like many individuals in the real world, whether it's a plagiarism example or cheating at Battleship or cheating in sport, athletes cheat because they believe the rewards for winning are far more important than fair play. Just think about that for a second. So the rewards for winning are far more important than fair play. So for me, at 5 years old, beating my younger brother in Battleship, the reward of that was much more than the fair play aspect. Learning that cheating is okay also can come from people within sport and some people that are considered mentors, like coaches, parents. Several years ago now, Bill Belichick and the Patriots got in trouble for filming opponents very, very up close and being able to then check out kind of their play calling and their playbooks and such. That's from the top football team in the NFL for the last decade. So there's a cultural thing going on, right? That is something that's seen as okay, and I'm not picking on the Patriots, I'm just saying as an example, that this doesn't just come from individual athletes. This can come from coaches, this can come from parents, this can come from administration of teams, athletic directors, where then if something's part of the culture, it means it's normal and it means it's accepted. And so you may be an athlete that is a part of that cheating culture. And I would contend even that as a American citizen, you naturally kind of fall into the cheating culture. You have to make a decision whether or not to do these behaviors. And it's often very, very easy to decide to do the one that has the winning outcome for you. So, like all acronyms, within this semester, there's another one. Remember your roots. So if you are going to have character and you are going to not participate in this cheating culture, root stands for R is rules. Play how the game is intended. Follow the rules. The first O for opponents. Should be respected as equals. That doesn't mean that you can't play hard against someone. That doesn't mean that you have to be best buddies. That means that you should be respecting the opponents that you are playing, as well as the officials, which is the next O. Even if you disagree with the calls. Again, that doesn't mean that you can't disagree with that, but there has to be some level of respect. Teammates deserve to be encouraged and treated positively. And then S for self, treating yourself in a manner that you feel really upholds your beliefs and your character. So remember your roots. And so this is kind of something I think would be a great little tool to teach with if you're coaching, if you, especially younger kids, running through these things would be a wonderful activity to help kind of that character building process. And like I said, especially if you're working with individuals who are fairly new to sport. So the Josephson Institute for Sport Ethics has another acronym that they call team approach. And the team approach, the T is teach character by emphasizing value and trustworthiness. E is enforce these values with firmness and consistency. So if you have a value of not cheating and being respectful and being honest, then you must stand your ground on it, and you have to be consistent in applying it. So you can't pick and choose if you're going to be honest. You can't pick and choose if you're going to be humble. You need to be as consistent as you can. Advocate for the importance of living with core values and model these core values, which means as an athlete, as a coach, as a role model, as a mentor, whoever you are, model those values. Practice what you preach. Walk the walk, if you will. Talk the talk. John Wooden, probably one of the most famous coaches in history, in my opinion, but you've probably heard of him. He's a basketball coach, coached for UCLA for many, many years. Very successful. Very, very, very successful. One of the most winningest coaches of all time. Lots of national championships, so on and so forth. He has since passed. He has written books, though. He was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's coach in college, amongst others. Lots of other famous people, too. But anyways, there's lots of books out there on him if you're interested, and I really enjoy them. He's known for some great one-liners and quotes. So here is one quote from John Wooden. I consider it a sacred trust, helping to mold character, instill productive principles and values, and provide a positive example to those under my supervision. He really was well known for not just being a great coach. In fact, basketball came second, for lack of a better term. And like I said, I've read a bunch about him and his own books. He really cared about his players as students and as young men. He was a male basketball coach. So he cared about his players as young men and as students first. And he felt that if you taught those character building properties and values, that the basketball would come. Yes, they practiced. Absolutely, they practiced basketball. But he felt like all of this had to be in place for teams to be successful in whatever sport they were pursuing. And guess what? It worked really well for him as one of the most winningest coaches in history. So, take it from John Wooden that these things are important. Regarding that, then, athletes in our society are often role models. And you probably or may have heard of certain people being role models for certain, friends, family. If you didn't have athletes as role models, I'm sure you could easily find one. I certainly did. So I was a kid in the early 90s. I'm dating myself a little bit. But, I loved Christy Yamaguchi, who was a figure skater. I'm a big Raiders fan. So I had several Raiders players that I really looked up to, believe it or not, even as a female. Had some male NFL football player role models, like Tim Brown, and Jerry Rice, especially. Anyways, so whoever your role model is, or role models were as children, chances are there's probably an athlete in there. And that's certainly true for a lot of people in our society. And so why? Why were those your role models? Well, they're very impressive, right? They've reached the pinnacle. everything's kind of had to come together for them, but they've had to work very hard. What I said earlier about them just being fascinating to watch, I totally agree. They're very entertaining, intriguing. They are so good. Many of they absolutely have this genetic makeup, so that's what I mean by blessed with certain attributes. They're covered in media, so we see them all the time from very young. There's marketing for certain products and advertisements, and like I said, you can be these people on video games. And so there's lots of reasons that athletes are role models. Some people don't think that they should be role models, and that's okay. You can believe that. But this is absolutely true, that this happens. The other argument often I hear about athletes as role models is that, when athletes get into trouble, let's say, they get arrested, and they'll make statements, and I'm not saying this is true of everyone. I'm just saying they will make statements like, well, I never wanted to be a role model. That may be true. Maybe they did just want to play football and live how they wanted to live. But the reality is, I would argue, this is simply my argument, the reality is that as a professional or as a person who has reached the pinnacle of your sport, you are automatically a role model to somebody. And you may not like that. You may not accept that role, but you are. So that's the reality. Athlete income. Many athletes are compensated quite well for their talents. I would encourage you, I'm not going to ruin anything. You need to go back to the slideshow, click into this. This is going to take you to the Forbes Top 100 Paid Athletes list. And I want you to check it out. See who's there for this last year, and see what you notice. I'll give you one little hint. It has something to do with gender. So you will notice perhaps that women aren't on this list, or there are very few on this list. Like I said, I'm not going to give too much away. Think about that for a second. Right? So that's a little tip. So I want you to check it out. I want you to kind of see what sports, how much money we're talking, and think about, is that okay? Is that not okay to you? The reasons why. So let's talk about, we're kind of going to change gears here. Like I said, we're doing a little bit of a sampling of different topics in sport ethics. So let's go now, and probably one of the most popular and certainly prevalent topics in sport ethics is performance-enhancing drugs, PEDs. PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs, are lots of different substances. So this does not have to be steroids. Steroids is simply one type of performance-enhancing drugs. This can be anything that alters performance in some way. So performance-enhancing drugs have been used since the dawn of time, honestly. You can go back, and there are lots of cases and evidence for individuals having or taking substances in order to improve work, in order to improve performance in war, so battle. Some examples, and most of these are pretty popular, or I should say famous examples. Incas chewed coca leaves, and actually they still do. Coca leaves, if you've ever spent any time in South America and in the higher altitude areas like Peru and such, chew coca leaves. They're at altitude, and really this helps people feel better, especially to sustain strenuous work at high altitudes. And that's another statement I should make. Sometimes performance-enhancing drugs don't work at all, and sometimes they work really well. There are some crazy cases in the past where people, they will drink urine of certain animals. That probably didn't help very much. There are some cultures that after battles actually eat. They are cannibals, and they will eat other humans because they believe that they're absorbing their power. That probably is not helping them. But the examples I've given you here, they do work. Norse warriors would eat psychedelic mushrooms before battle. And so if you've ever heard of the berserkers going berserk, is where that comes from, because they would take these, they would eat mushrooms that would cause them to hallucinate and really go crazy in battle. That's true. And then pilots in World War II, and actually not just World War II, but in pretty much still modern times, would use amphetamines to counter fatigue, and those work as well. Amphetamines include things like, in our world, like Adderall and other ADH medications, things that kind of amp you up. So amphetamine is used, that's Adderall, is used for ADHD, but if you don't have ADHD, it amps you up. So we have used these for a lot of reasons, and some for pretty good reasons, right? I mean, pilots in World War II, we're talking war. So if you're a fatigued pilot, that's probably a really bad thing. If you are working in high altitudes strenuously and you feel awful, chewing cocoa leaves can probably be pretty good, for you. And certainly, if we're talking about sport and competition, ancient Olympians, prior to the beginning of the modern Olympics, which restarted in 1896, ancient Olympians from Greece were doing all sorts of things. Opium, mushrooms, strychnine, which is a poison, essentially. In the 50s, and steroids were actually introduced as a doping agent, so anabolic steroids. And when I say anabolic steroids, what I'm talking about is typically anything on the androgen pathway, which means that you are building testosterone. Okay, so if something can build testosterone, that's what we mean by anabolic steroids. And they are effective. I'm not going to lie to you and say that they're not. Steroids do build or increase protein synthesis. And in the 1960 Olympics was the first recorded doping fatality. And I believe, gosh, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm losing it now. It was a cyclist who was taking a crazy concoction of amphetamines and strychnine and things like that. And that actually even happened in the early 1900s as well. So here you go. Here's a little bit of a timeline, simply a small timeline that I thought would kind of help you get an overview of the last 120 years. So in 1904 to 1920, PEDs were absolutely used in the modern Olympics. And like I said, the modern Olympics got restarted again in 1896. The International Amateur Athletic Federation in 1928 actually prohibited doping. So when I say doping, I mean, of course, taking PEDs. And PEDs, again, being a variety of drugs. In 1958, the Food and Drug Administration actually approved steroids for use for medical issues, and that is still true today. So you can use anabolic steroids if under the care of a physician, and it should be for a medical condition that warrants that. So we have lots of diseases that can potentially be muscle wasting, lead you to be very frail and weak. And so anabolic steroids can be prescribed legally by a medical doctor. 1968, that was the Mexico City Olympics, and that's when we had our first drug testing at the Olympics. 1975, anabolic steroids were added to the International Olympic Committee's banned substances list. So every athletic association, including the NCAA, has a banned substance list. Anabolic steroids are on all of them, by the way. Steroid testing for the first time at the Olympics. So now we're testing for anabolic steroids explicitly. In 1988, a couple things happened. President Reagan signed a law that outlawed non-medical steroid use. Now, as of 1998, it is not just on banned substances lists of athletic federations. It is now illegal for the American population to take steroids, anabolic steroids, without a medical necessity and without under care of a physician. So it is illegal. That was in 1988. In 1988 also, we had a very, very popular or very famous case, or infamous case, if you will. In the 88 Olympics, Ben Johnson from Canada, he's a 100-meter sprinter, was stripped of his gold medal after testing positive for anabolic steroids, and it was a big deal. Carl Lewis was the American that was very popular at the time, the American sprinter that was very popular at the time, and it was a very controversial case. If you are interested in watching, you remember ESPN's 30 for 30 series, 9.79 is the documentary about the 1988 100-meter final, and it is a great watch. So I highly recommend that. 9.79 has a little asterisk after the 9.79, and it recaps that race. Really good. Okay, 1990, Congress backs up. President Reagan passes Anabolic Steroids Control Act. And now in 1999 and in year 2000, we have the World Anti-Doping Agency, the WADA, 1999 WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency. And then in 2000, USADA, the United States Anti-Doping Agency, begins operations. So these are the two groups that now oversee kind of the elite level competition as far as drug enforcement goes. 2004, WADA takes control of the banned list from the IOC. And then in 2012, probably one of the most famous cases of the last decade, Lance Armstrong was stripped of 7 Tour de France titles due to doping. And he took a lot of different things. Here's a few other pretty famous cases. East Germany, 1965 to 1989, actually had a national system for doping of both men and women athletes. They actually had a whole state plan that set up the doping program. And they had huge success. This is East Germany. So post-World War II, of course, we had East and West Germany. East Germany was the communist bloc, if you will. West Germany was considered part of Western Europe. And East Germany had huge success in powerlifting, other power sports, and they're really a small country. East Germany is a small country. In 1976, they won 40 gold medals, which is just unheard of. Women's swimming, for example, in that year, won 11 of the 13 gold medals available. They had huge success, and so it was really odd for such a small country to be so instantly, I don't want to say instantly, but so dominant and to seem to be pretty quickly advancing. It probably lasted for the entire time East Germany was around, and the reunification of Germany happened in 1990. I don't know if you were alive or remember that, but obviously the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, and when that happened, Germany was reunified, and so now we just have Germany, right? So this probably lasted the entire time, but probably one of the most famous cases of state-sponsored doping, besides the latest Russia information, although that investigation is ongoing, but you can certainly check that out too. This is absolutely a very small list of individuals who were caught eventually or eventually admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs. Ben Johnson, like I said, in 1988. Lyle Alzado, very famous football player. He was a Raider. He was very famous because you'll see the Sports Illustrated cover here. He truly believed that the steroids that he was taking for almost the entire length of his NFL career caused his inoperable brain tumor and ultimately his death. So he died. And he really truly believes that. So, very famous case. Marion Jones, so sprinter. Barry Bonds, obviously. Roger Clemens, Jason Giambi, all baseball players. Mark McGuire, could go on. Cyclists, Lance Armstrong, Floyd Landis, lots of runners have been caught or admitted to performance-enhancing drugs. So lots of cases of this. There's an argument that everyone is doing it. And so it's not cheating, because if everyone is doing it, then you have an equal playing field. I actually would contend that you do not, because I do think that there are clean athletes out there still. So I don't think that everyone is doing it. This is my opinion. On top of that, drugs affect, just like any drug that you've ever taken, they affect people. And I mean, like ibuprofen even. I'm not talking about illicit drugs. But drugs affect people in different ways, and different genders are affected by different things. So it's actually probably not a level playing field, even if everyone is taking performance-enhancing substances. So I would just contend that you often hear that, but I'm not sure that's a great argument. So let's say performance-enhancing drugs don't really get you too excited. That's okay. What next? Do we do genetic modification or gene therapy? Is that okay? Is that would be performance enhancing, but if we change your genes, does that make it okay? Think about that, because our technology is always advancing, and so what's the line for you as far as performance enhancing goes? Does living at altitude qualify as performance enhancing? Probably. So that's okay. So for instance, it's a little bit of a tangent, but legally you can live at altitude and get more red blood cells produced, right? Because that's what happens if you're at altitude. If you live at altitude, you get more red blood cells. That's really good for endurance sport. But if you take EPO to get more red blood cells, that's illegal. So some means are legal, some means are illegal or banned. So where's the line for you? What's okay? What's not okay? And then after, or with medical technology, is there a line that we cross? Think about that. So related back to kind of the hint I gave you earlier with the athlete income, there are some intriguing concepts related to gender and sexual equality in sport. Income is one of them. And there's a lot of arguments for and against the differences in income. A lot of people will say, well, the most popular sports are male dominated. And that's true to some extent. But, there's some pretty popular sports out there for women. And sometimes the women are not compensated as well as the men. I'm thinking of like the the U.S. women's soccer team versus the men's U.S. soccer team. The women's U.S. soccer team, more successful. They won the last World Cup, right? The men do not do so well in international competition, but they get paid a lot more than the women. So like I said, there's arguments for and against. Think about that. There's also some controversy sometimes about the sexuality of women in sport. So if you think about uniforms, for example, what are beach volleyball players wearing if you're a man versus a woman? What are tennis players wearing if you're a man versus a woman? And I'm just throwing out examples. I'm not arguing for or against any of this stuff, honestly. I want you to think about them. But you can see that. You just Google Maria Sharapova. Or Google who's the gal was losing her name. I'm sorry. Anyways, if you just Google some of the most popular women tennis players, you will find that the sports magazine covers and stuff are highly sexualized in many ways. So marketing and media, you absolutely will see this. You have to decide whether that's okay or not for you, for them, and for our society. Opportunity. So do men have better opportunities than women? Do women have better opportunities than men in certain sports? Probably is the answer to that. And probably there are other types of gender and sexual equality issues for you, potentially. Related to that, then, I'd just like to wrap up with some things that we often, or one thing that we recognized and attempted to combat through a law, very famous law, you've probably heard of it, Title IX. So Title IX was passed in 1972, and this law actually prohibits discrimination based on gender in all educational programs that receive federal funding. Many times Title IX is thought of as a sports law, but it is not. It's not just sports. The types of discrimination that are covered in Title IX include sexual harassment, the failure to provide equal opportunity in athletics, yes, but also discrimination based on pregnancy and such. So thousands of schools across the country are not in compliance with Title IX, and sometimes it's related to sport. So the selection of sport, so the Department of Education evaluates the following factors related to sport. This is the selection of sport, so which sports are selected for each gender, and levels of competition effectively accommodate the interests and ability of members of both sexes. The provision of equipment and supplies. You're supposed to not discriminate based on gender. Scheduling of games and practice, travel and money, assignment and compensation of coaches and tutors, locker rooms, practice, competitive facilities, training facilities, dining facilities, housing, publicity. So all of these things are covered in Title IX, but not just I, but it's actually pretty easy to find evidence of most schools being out of compliance with Title IX for a variety of reasons. And so I'll just throw this out there. Usually it's because of football. So football, obviously, mostly male, if not all male, in most schools. And so that often throws off the Title IX compliance. But no school is going to get rid of their football team if they're mildly successful, right? There are sometimes teams go away, but very rarely. Once you have a football team, usually it's there to stay. So pulling that is probably not going to happen. Just throwing it out there as a thought. So what do? Clearly, whether you like it or not, you probably like it, but sport is an integral and I would argue important part of our society. So as a professional, you have to obey the law. You should always strive to keep your clients and athletes safe. And I hope that you would want your individuals to grow up or continue to flourish as productive citizens and good people. And so you can always go back to that very simple model I presented to you, several days ago now. That three-pronged decision-making model when needed. Is it legal? Is it balanced? And how does it make you feel? So with that, there's some thoughts about sport ethics. Like I said, barely scratching the surface, but I hope it gives you some things to think about and be aware of in our society. And if you're very interested in it, there are lots of wonderful documentaries and books related to this topic, and so I would encourage you to continue to explore this because it is quite fascinating and very prominent in our society. So take care of yourself as always. I hope you've enjoyed these topics and sampling some of these ethical considerations throughout this session. And as always, please contact me, questions, comments, concerns, and I hope to see you around soon. Thank you so much, everyone, for your hard work over this session. I hope, like I said, you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.